Hi everybody, Captain Al speaking with your bonus video for April. We're looking at the Boeing 747-400 non-normal procedures. Today we're going to be looking at the fire fuselage non-normals. If you remember, we covered in one of the FTDs, we covered smoke, fire, or fumes procedure, which is an in-flight procedure of an onboard nature. Today we'll be covering the fire fuselage non-normals, which is everything outside the aircraft. So the fire non-normals that are covered this month will be the wheel well fire, cargo fire forward and aft, main deck fire, engine fire 1, 2, 3, 4, and APU fire. Now let's look at the fire wheel well first. The most common cause of a wheel well fire could be hot brakes or ruptured brake line after takeoff. Prompt execution of the wheel well fire non-normal checklist is important. It's not a memory item. The auto throttle is recommended to remain engaged throughout the procedure, whether you level off or you keep climbing. And normally we're going to slow to below 270 knots, which is the gear extend speed. And so we'll be slowing to 265 or less. And at high gross weights, extending the flaps to 1 may be needed. The max flap extension altitude is flight level 200. With a wheel well fire, we're going to declare an emergency because it is a fire situation. And there's two choices you have to how to handle the problem in flight. The first one is probably the more recommended technique, which is to level off if the terrain and traffic permit. And then chances are, if you took off from an airport and the weather is acceptable, you're probably going to return to that airport. So rather than continuing the climb and getting higher and further away from the airport, generally it's probably better to level off, slow down, lower the gear, and then return to the airport. You can, however, continue the climb as well. If terrain or traffic is a factor, we can continue the climb and lower the gear when we're below the gear extend speed. The level off procedure would be to declare an emergency and start slowing immediately. Even though the wheel well fire is not a memory item, it's not a recall item, and we're going to get the checklist out to do it. You can, however, start to slow down before the checklist is complete, so there's no reason why you can't initiate the slowdown procedure to get the gear out rather than waiting for the checklist. And then, of course, we're going to do things by the checklist, but by the time he gets the checklist out and reads it, you've already initiated the procedure to start slowing down. So generally, we tell ATC that we have a wheel well fire. We would tell them we're declaring an emergency, we're leveling off at our present altitude, and then we call for the wheel well fire checklist. On the mode control panel, the actions would be to push altitude hold. When you push altitude hold, the airplane will come out of VNAV. The indicated airspeed Mach window will open. We can set the speed to 265 or lower. The gear extend speed is 270. However, if you set it to 270, the auto throttle will tend to slow the deceleration as you approach 270. So it's better to have something less than 270, and that way the speed will decelerate through 270 and you can lower the gear with the checklist. The speed brakes will be extended gradually and fully in order to help and assist to slow down in the most expeditious manner. And so these are the indications that we get with a fire wheel well. And of course we're going to silence the warning with the master warning indicator, and that will silence the siren, and then we're going to identify the problem. And the problem would be fire wheel well. On the mode control panel, if we're doing the level off procedure, we're going to go ahead and push altitude hold. Again, the indicated airspeed Mach window will open up to your target speed. If you were climbing in VNAV, that's going to be, you know, somewhere 300 knots or greater. Then we're going to take the selector and spin it counterclockwise to get the speed to 265 or less. The thrust levers will be coming back toward idle as you level off. We're going to leave the auto throttle engaged. We're not going to disconnect the auto throttle. And we'll slowly extend the speed brakes, and that will help with the deceleration. As the pilot monitoring reads the checklist, he'll be reading that to lower the gear at the gear extend speed of 270, and then landing gear lever down. And at that time, as long as we're below 270, we'll lower the landing gear. As the gear is coming out, we'll go ahead and retract the speed brakes. The other procedure would be to continue the climb. Either procedure is correct. There's no right or wrong procedure. I prefer the level off procedure because, again, chances are you're going to stop your climb, you're going to fight the fire by lowering the gear, and you're going to return to the airport, assuming the weather's okay. Now, if the weather's not okay, or you have terrain issues or traffic issues, you could always continue the climb and still do the wheel wall fire procedure. And the procedure for that would be to continue the climb in VNAV. You can speed intervene, which would be to open the window. The indicated airspeed Mach window will open up when you push the selector for speed intervention, and then dial the speed to 265 or less. What that's going to do in VNAV is it will tend to, the elevator will pitch to control the speed. The speed will drop off. The airplane will climb more rapidly as the speed is dropping off. And we'll start to get to the point where we're below 270, and then we can lower the gear. This particular diagram, VNAV should still be engaged here. Where you see in the second diagram, the bottom diagram, you can see the VNAV light bar is extinguished. It should still be illuminated because all we've done is speed intervene here. Notice in both cases we leave the autopilot engaged, and we're also leaving the auto throttle engaged. If desired, we can also extend the speed brake slowly, even in the climb, in order to get the speed at 270 or below. And of course, when the pilot monitoring reads the part in the checklist that says lower the landing gear when you get to 270 or below, landing gear lever down, then we would lower the gear at that time. And then, of course, if you did extend the speed brakes, you want to stow them as the gear is coming out. And then, of course, you would level off as necessary, or if you elect to continue to climb, you're going to climb to a lower altitude and divert to another airport if necessary. You can also ensure that the auto throttle is still engaged. The thrust lever should be retarding as your speed is slowing, and again, we want the auto throttle on. Nothing wrong with disconnecting the auto throttle and pulling the thrust levers back, but the point is you have to remember that you disconnected the auto throttle. And in that case, once the gear is down, you'd have to increase the power to maintain the speed with the gear down. And so, I have no problem. For example, on check rides, if a person did that, if they disconnect the auto throttle, I wouldn't have a problem with that as long as they remembered that they disconnected the auto throttle. So when the gear came down, they're going to have to add some pretty hefty power in order to maintain your speed. And again, as long as they did that, it was fine because they're controlling the speed. They're doing it manually, that's all. But if you happen to forget that you disconnected the auto throttle and then the speed dropped dangerously low, when the gear is down and the power is back, then that would be a different situation. If once the gear is down, if the fire wheel well light stays illuminated, you can consider increasing the speed to 320 knots. 320 knots is the gear extended speed. So you have two speeds for the gear extend speed, which is 270 knots or less, and then the gear extended speed is up to 320 knots. If the wheel well fire light stays illuminated, and let's say you decide to return to the airport, you could start your turn back to the airport, you could get a lower altitude, you could go to flight level change, and you could increase the speed to 320 knots. And that way the nose would pitch down, the airplane would accelerate to that new speed of 320, and that all results in increased airflow, which helps with the extinguishing. Because remember, there are no extinguishers for a wheel well fire. Your only extinguishing weapon is airflow to get the gear down. Again, there's fire detection only. There is no bottle protection. Again, the protection is the air coming out as the gear comes down to snuff out any fire or situation that would be for hot brakes. And then once the wheel well fire light extinguishes, we're going to start our time. And we're starting our time for 20 minutes. And then after 20 minutes, you have two choices really. One is to leave the gear extended. That's probably the recommended one because you have no idea what damage has been done, if any. And so it's probably better to leave the gear extended and go find a place to land, return from where you came from, or divert to another airport. But if you had to, you could always, after 20 minutes, when the light extinguishes, retract the gear if needed for performance. And then you could check the gear extended performance charts in the performance in-flight section of the QRH, and they would provide the necessary information as far as fuel flow and what kind of fuel burn you're going to have with the gear extended. We can't trust the FMC fuel predictions at that time because they're only made for gear up situations. But if we had a gear down situation, we do have charts in the QRH that could help us determine what our range is going to be with the gear down. And again, it's a fire situation, so with fire situations, we want to land at the nearest suitable airport in point of time. And what that means is that you want to land at an airport that's suitable for the airplane that you're operating, meaning it has a long enough runway, it has the necessary facilities. Depending on what kind of emergency it is, you may need crash fire rescue facilities, and so the nearest suitable airport could be one where you have enough facilities to handle a problem where we want to land the airplane and also have assistance in terms of crash fire rescue. There could be some airports that may be suitable for an emergency landing strip, but they may not have facilities. And of course, if it's a situation where you have to put it down, then that could be a suitable airport as well. So again, it's up to the captain to what's a nearest suitable airport, but we want to land at the nearest suitable airport in point of time. The wheel well fire checklist, when we call for fire wheel well, the condition would be that fire is detected in a main wheel well. When extending or retracting landing gear, do not exceed the gear extend limit speed of 270.82, and then landing gear lever down. This attempts to remove and extinguish the fire source. And of course, the caveat here is we have to be at below the 270 speed. And that's why we're taking the speed and putting it down to 265 or less, so that the speed decelerates through 270. And then plan to land at the nearest suitable airport. That's the term. And so that means you've got a fire situation, and it's not a situation where you have a choice here. You have to find the nearest suitable airport and land. Note, do not use FMC performance predictions with the gear extended. Flight with gear down increases fuel consumption and decreases climb performance. So refer to the gear down performance tables in the performance in flight chapter for flight planning. So you may be able to climb to a higher altitude with the gear down, but you're not going to be able to climb to your original cruise altitude. And you're going to have to limit your altitude, and obviously the fuel burn is going to be increased. So if we do have to divert to another airport, we'd have to figure out that we have the fuel to do that. And that may be a situation where you might have to raise the gear after 20 minutes if performance dictates that you can't really leave it down. And the fire wheel well light, the fire light has gone out, and then you may need to retract the gear in that case. But if it is preferable to leave the gear down and go land where you came from, where you took off from, or a nearest suitable airport that's nearby. If the gear must be retracted for airplane performance, then we go to step 6. If the gear does not need to be retracted for airplane performance, then that completes the fire wheel well checklist. If the gear is retracted for airplane performance, then the checklist will say when the fire wheel well message blanks, wait 20 minutes. This ensures the fire is extinguished. And then landing gear lever up. After landing gear retraction is complete, landing gear lever off, and then that completes the fire wheel well checklist. Another situation that we could have would be a cargo fire. Could be a forward cargo fire or an aft cargo fire in one of the lower lobes. With a freighter, of course, you have the main deck, and you have various compartments within the main deck, and then you have your cargo compartments on the lower lobes in the form of the forward cargo compartment and the aft cargo compartment. And those compartments have smoke detectors. If you get a cargo fire forward or aft message, this is another one that's not a memory item, it's not a recall item, it's just a checklist item. So based on the red warning light that you get, we would call for the appropriate checklist, whether it be cargo fire forward or cargo fire aft. It does require confirmation from both pilots before you arm the compartment. So the pilot monitoring the course would read the checklist and then would confirm before he arms the compartment, and the pilot flying would confirm that he's got the proper switch before he arms it. It also has the plan to land at the nearest suitable airport term because it is a fire. And again, that's captain's discretion what airport that's going to be, but it's one that's suitable for the aircraft, again, in terms of runway length and perhaps facilities in terms of crash fire rescue. There are actionable ground items required as well once you're on the ground. We want to inform the ground, and they'll have this in a checklist, to inform the ground not to open any cargo compartment until all the crew is off the airplane, because that could spread the fire very rapidly, and we want to make sure that if we're on the ground, we're off of the airplane before they do that. So a cargo fire forward or aft for a passenger airplane, the panel would look like this. You have alternate action switches for the forward and an alternate action switch for the aft. And when you push that on, it will arm that appropriate compartment and arm the bottles. And then, of course, the discharge switch is a momentary action switch that once you push it, makes contact, comes right back out, but it has the effect of discharging 2 of the 4 bottles that are in the forward or the aft compartment. The freighter will have a little bit different setup. It'll also have the forward and aft lower lobe switches, but it will also have a switch for the main deck, and when you again push that, it will arm the main deck or the forward or the aft lower lobe. And then when you push the discharge switch, in the case of the forward and aft lower lobes, it's going to again fire 2 of the bottles immediately, and then after a short delay, the other 2 bottles will fire, or on landing, whichever comes first. And if it's a main deck fire, by pushing the switch, it will depress. Notice the title says cargo fire depress or discharge. Well, in the case of the main deck, there are no fire bottles within it, but it will depressurize the airplane, and so that it removes the oxygen, and the fire, of course, would suffocate itself by the fact that the aircraft is going to depressurize to 25,000 feet. And so that will happen when you push the cargo fire depress switch, and that'll depressurize the airplane. Here's what it would look like on the freighter if you had a cargo fire in the forward or aft. And again, you get the fire bell 1 second on, 10 seconds off. Depending on your option, this one it looks like it's 1 second on and maybe 5 seconds. There's different options, but the standard one is 1 second on, 10 seconds off. And again, we would silence the siren or silence the depending on what it is. In this case, it's the fire bell. we'd silence that and then identify the ICAS message and then take action with the appropriate checklist. For a fire cargo forward, you will have the indication there'll be a forward light on the overhead. The condition will be smoke is detected in the forward lower lobe cargo compartment. And then fire cargo firearm switch confirm armed. And so that's the confirmation item. So again, if I were the pilot monitoring, I would read that. Forward cargo firearm switch confirm armed. SATCOM will shut down to prevent overheating. 2 packs are automatically shut down, and the associated packed messages are shown. And then I would reach up to the panel and put my finger on the forward cargo arm switch, and I'd say forward cargo arm switch confirm. And then the pilot flying will look at it and say confirm, and then I would push it and say armed. And so that's a verification that we've got proper switch before I arm it. And then pack 3 control selector off. Warning, either pack 1 or 2 must be operating to prevent excessive smoke accumulation on the flight deck. So we're turning pack 3 off, but we have to ensure that either pack 1 or 2 are operating. And it's probably going to be pack 1, because when you arm the cargo compartment, 2 packs shut down. It's usually pack 2 and 3 that shut down. Then cargo fire depress discharge switch push and hold for 1 second. In the freighter, there's 210 minutes of fire suppression are available. And again, 2 bottles are going to discharge immediately. And after a brief delay, the other 2 bottles will discharge. The brief delay, they don't tell you this, but the brief delay is about 30 minutes. If you were to land prior to the 30 minutes, then once you land, those other 2 bottles would discharge on landing. So if you happen to land, let's say 10 minutes later, and that 30 minutes hasn't gone by, they will discharge as you land. They're pretty much a metered flow. So even when you land, it's still a metered flow. I understand they don't just discharge their entire contents. It's still kind of a metered flow. The metered flow will give you 210 minutes on the freighter of fire suppression. And of course, when you push the discharge switch, that's a momentary action switch. It'll make contact. You lift the guard, push the switch, hold it for 1 second or half a second. Just make sure it's pushed fully in. And then the discharge light will illuminate. You'll also get an ICAS message that tells you that the bottle has been the 2 of the bottles have been discharged. When you arm the forward cargo compartment, of course, it's going to say armed, and it is going to latch in the armed position since it's an alternate action switch. You'll also notice with a cargo fire forward situation, if you go to the ECS synoptic, you will see that 2 packs have been shut down, and again, usually that's going to be packs 2 and 3. And 1 should be ensured to be on so that the flight deck does not get excessive smoke. If for some reason 1 wasn't operating, you should turn 2 back on. So that's the idea. You want to check this to make sure we've got airflow to prevent that excessive smoke from getting into the flight deck. And of course, you will get an ICAS message that tells you that the cargo bottle, in this case it's bottles, have been discharged. It doesn't say bottles, but it really is 2 bottles that fire at one time. And you can see the memo message there that pack 2 and 3 are off because of arming that cargo compartment, in this case the forward. And then choose one, on the ground or in flight. If we're in flight, go to step 5. Then it says do not accomplish the following checklist, pack. Choose one. Airplane is at or below 8,000, or airplane is above 8,000. If the airplane is above 8,000, then we're going to go to step 7. We're going to push the landing altitude switch to manual. Manual landing altitude mode shows on ICAS. And then the landing altitude selector we're going to set between 8,000 to 8,500. And what that does is it raises the cabin, it increases the outflow through the outflow valve, and hopefully it removes some smoke that goes out the outflow valve as well. Now, of course, if you're on the ground, then all we do is we have the warning and that's to inform the ground personnel not to open any cargo door until all supernumeraries and crew have exited the airplane and firefighting equipment is nearby. So we don't want them opening the cargo doors while we're still on the airplane, because that could present a threat to the crew. So we want to be off the airplane and away from it before they do that. And of course, in order to do that, this happens to be the type of landing altitude selector that we push on and then turn the knob and rotary selector in order to rotate it to 8,000 to 8,500 feet. In some airplanes, it's just a rotary selector, and you got to pull it out. You pull the actual rotary selector out, and that puts it to manual, and then you rotate it. So it depends. There's some different options. You could have this option where you got to push a button and then turn the rotary switch. It could be one switch that's a rotary switch, and you pull it out and then rotate the switch. And then, of course, you're looking at the primary ICAS to determine the landing altitude, and you're going to raise that between 8,000 to 8,500 feet. It's pretty sensitive when you do it, so you have to kind of do it in increments. And the whole idea is that you're increasing the airflow through the outflow valves by raising the cabin, and that's going to help with smoke removal. And then, of course, plan to land at the nearest suitable airport. Any fire, you're going to have that. And then when you leave your cruise altitude for landing, we're going to bring the landing altitude switch back to auto. And auto landing altitude mode shows on the ICAS. And so again, the assumption is that you might stay at that altitude you are at for a while if you have to. But once you leave your cruise altitude, you can go back to auto. And do not accomplish the following checklist: landing altitude, because that'll be displayed when you have the selector in manual. And the checklist will be complete except you have deferred items, and the deferred items will be the descent checklist, which is done via the QRH, the approach checklist, which is done via the QRH, and then of course you're going to have that warning there again to inform the ground personnel to not open the cargo door until everybody's away from the airplane. If you have a fire in the main deck, it would look like this. And again, you get the bell, fire bell, and you get the master warning, and you get the main deck light and the main deck switch. And of course, we're going to silence the bell and take away the master warning light. And of course, on the ICAS, we would have the fact that it's a fire on the main deck. And you could have one of several things. It could just say fire main deck if it can't really pinpoint where the fire is. Or it could say fire main deck aft, fire main deck forward, or fire main deck mid. If those detectors can sense exactly where the fire is, then it will maybe help identify where the fire has started. If it really can't determine that, then it's just going to say fire main deck. Condition is smoke is detected in the main deck area. Objective is to suppress the fire and to land as soon as possible. On the ground, again, you just have that warning. In flight, you notice we're going to right away, just like a cabin altitude problem, we're going to don our oxygen mask, establish crew communications, and bring the supernumerary oxygen switch on. So that's exactly the same for a cabin altitude problem as it would be for a main deck fire. Remember, the main deck is right below the flight deck. So if there's a fire in that main deck, it could be critical to the flight deck. So again, same things we talked about in the cabin altitude situation that we had in the last FTD. We're going to don our oxygen masks. It could be a full face mask with goggles. In other words, the goggles and the oxygen unit are all one. Or it could be just a quick donning mask, and then you have smoke goggles that are separate. Most airplanes today have the full face mask. And again, generally we're going to don that. We have 5 seconds to get it on usually. We don't want to hesitate. We want to get the mask on, make sure oxygen is flowing, and then communicate with each other that we can hear each other. Again, same things we talked about. You can take off your headset, put it on your neck before you don the mask. And once the mask is on, then you can you can get the headset off your neck and put it on your head. And that way it's over the oxygen mask. And of course, to get the mask out, we're going to squeeze the red release handle on both sides. We're going to pull the mask up and out. That's going to inflate the harness when you're holding the red release handles. The harness will inflate. When the left door opens, that activates the oxygen mask microphone. And then we can put it on our head, make sure it's on the upper part of our head, that it creates a good seal. And then we can release the red release handles, and then the harness will deflate and it will secure on our head. And of course, we want to make sure that we have a good seal on the mouth and nose portion, that there's no leaks, and it's a good solid. It's holding firmly to our face. And of course, again, when the harness inflates, we place it on our head. We release the red release handles, and just what I said, we ensure a proper fit and seal, so there's no difference there. And then we want to establish crew communications like we talked about. Easiest way to do that is just take your control column and go down to interphone. You could go to the audio panel and go down to interphone as well. Or you could select flight and select the RT position of the audio control panel, or the RT position of your control column. And then you're going to make the announcement, Captain on oxygen, First Officer on oxygen. And again, that's important because it tells us, number one, we're protected. Number two, we can hear each other to run through a problem. So again, a couple different ways you can do that. You can select a speaker if desired, or just use your headset. Again, the oxygen mask microphone will be active when the mask is out of the stowage box. And you can use your control column or your audio control panel in order to communicate with each other in the interphone position, or in the RT position, radio transmit position, if you select flight. Obviously, that's more steps, so to me it's easier to just select interphone and communicate that way. We're also going to bring on the supernumerary oxygen switch, lift the guard, push and hold momentarily. It's a toggle switch that's spring-loaded to neutral, so you just want to give it a solid push to on, hold it for half a second, then release it. That's going to deploy the supernumerary oxygen. And then you'll notice that after that it says main deck cargo firearm switch confirm armed. So we've got that same confirmation to confirm the proper switch. So again, I'm going to read that whole thing before I do it. So I'll say main deck cargo firearm switch confirm armed. SATCOM will shut down to prevent overheating. 2 packs are automatically shut down and the associated pack messages are shown. And then I'll take my finger and go up there and say main deck cargo firearm switch confirm. And then he'll look at it and say confirm. And then I'll push it and say armed. And then I'll continue. Pack 2 control selector off. And again, warning, either pack 1 or 3 must be operating to prevent excessive smoke accumulation in the flight deck. So I want to make sure I have at least 1 pack operating on. Preferably it's pack 1. Cargo fire depress discharge switch push and hold for 1 second. Plan to land at the nearest suitable airport. If the fire situation becomes uncontrollable, consider an immediate landing. And then distances in the following steps: assume airport elevation at sea level and no wind. Adjust distances for actual conditions. So again, when you push that depress switch, it is going to depressurize the airplane, and that's why you have your mask on, and that's why you're on oxygen, because you're depressurizing the airplane. And then we have a situation where if we do have a main deck fire, we're going to need to expedite to the nearest suitable airport, or land immediately if we need to. And you can see here that we've pushed the main deck arm switch. Alternate action switch goes on, says armed, and then the main deck will be illuminated as long as there's a fire or smoke in that deck, so that's going to stay there for a while probably. And then when you push the depress switch, it'll say depress, and then the cabin will depressurize to 25,000 feet. We've also reached up there, and you can see the supernumerary oxygen is on, and it's returned to the normal position, but it's deployed all the oxygen. Again, 2 packs will shut down, probably 2 and 3. And we've turned off pack 2, according to the checklist. And then we have choose one. The distance to the nearest suitable airport is 75 nautical miles or less. Start an expedited, uninterrupted descent to the lowest safe altitude, or 3,000 feet above field elevation, whichever is higher. And then go to step 12. Or, if the distance to the nearest suitable airport is more than 75 nautical miles, then expedite a climb or descent to 25,000 feet when conditions and terrain allow. Plan to stay at 25,000 feet until approximately 75 nautical miles from the runway. So again, if this happened at, flight level 390, let's say, and we press the depress switch, the airplane's going to depressurize to 25,000 feet on the freighter. We're going to descend to 25,000 feet then. Kind of like a rapid descent, we're going to descend expeditiously to 25,000 feet. Again, there's no real big hurry to get down there, but we still want to expedite it. And then we want to plan to stay at 25,000 feet until you're approximately 75 nautical miles from the runway. When you're 75 nautical miles from the runway, we're going to start another expedited, uninterrupted descent to the lowest safe altitude, or 3,000 feet above field elevation, whichever is higher. And then go to step 12. And notice it says descend at VMO MMO with the speed brakes extended. Maintain VMO MMO until 15 nautical miles from the runway. Plan to level off 15 nautical miles from the runway. So you can see the whole thing here is we've got a fire. We've got a fire on the main deck. We need to expeditiously land at the nearest suitable airport. And depending where our nearest suitable airport is, we're either going to, again, if it's 75 nautical miles or less, we're going to start an expedited, uninterrupted descent to the lowest safe altitude, or 3,000 feet above field elevation, whichever is higher. If it's more than 75 nautical miles, then we've got this other action to do that I just read. But the idea is that you're keeping the speed at VMO MMO to get there expeditiously. Do not delay the approach and landing. Auto brake selector max auto. And you can see here that depending where you're going to go, I think in this case it looks like we're going to make a right turn there and divert to that Charlie, whatever that says, I can't read it, some airport in Canada. And the airport, if it's 75 nautical miles away, then we're going to descend to flight level 250, and that's what we're doing here. So we've started we've lowered the altitude to 25,000. We've selected flight level change, and we're going to bring the speed up to VMO MMO and expedite the descent to 25,000. Notice the supernumerary oxygen is on. Notice 2 packs are off, packs 2 and 3. And then when you get 75 nautical miles from the field, and that's where we are right now, and notice we're at VMO MMO, we're at, right up there at the red box, is 360. And we're at 25,000 feet, and we're just approaching 75 nautical miles from the airport, our diversion airport. Then we're going to start down. And so you can see here we've set in 5,300 feet, which is probably 3,000 feet above the field elevation, assuming that's safe. And then at 75 nautical miles, we've started an uninterrupted descent using flight level change, speed VMO MMO, at all the way down to 5,300 feet. And then do not accomplish the following checklist: cabin altitude or rapid depressurization, pack, temperature zone, trim air off. And the checklist is complete except deferred items. When it comes to the deferred items, we're going to do the descent checklist. We're going to do it from the QRH, not from our checklist, our checklist that we have on the airplane, whether it be a QRH or a company checklist. In this case, we're going to do it from the QRH. And notice the difference is what's highlighted. Auto brakes are max auto in this case, because we're going to want to expedite our braking as well. And again, the same warning is there. Inform ground personnel not to open any cargo door until the supernumeraries and crew have exited the airplane and firefighting equipment is nearby. And then you'll see there, after we've descended via VMO MMO to 3,000 feet above field elevation, when we're approximately 15 nautical miles from the runway, we're going to extend the speed brakes. Remember, we probably stowed them once we got to that 5,300 feet. But once we get to 15 nautical miles, we're going to reduce our speed, extend the speed brakes, and then slow down rapidly and retract the configure for landing, flaps 1, flaps 5, flaps 10, gear down flaps 20, and then retract the speed brakes as needed. And of course the landing checklist is the same. Speed brake arm, landing gear down, flaps 30. This is one of the things we'll do in the in-flight portion of this. In the monthly bonus video, there'll be another video on the in-flight actions on these fire fuselage on normals. So this is one that we'll do. Not too many airlines actually practice this, and it's good to do it because I know UPS does, because they had that accident that was out of Dubai, and it was a situation that raised a lot of awareness on firefighting and crew incapacitation with a fire situation. The fire main deck checklist has been completed, and then we're on vectors for the approach. And you can see in this case we have slowed down to our flap 10 speed, and we're ready to intercept the localizer. And obviously at some point we have to go from VMO MMO to being safe to land. So that technique is given in that checklist in order to do that. And then of course as we descend on the glide slope, then we'll be at normal speeds at that point and land the airplane. Notice again the auto brakes should be max, and you can see they are here. So we'll go through that in-flight procedure in the other video. And then we have the fire engine or severe damage for engine 1, 2, 3, 4 or separation. Again, we're going to get the fire bell master warning lights. So after we silence the warning, and the fire bell will identify the problem, fire engine 1, and then I will go right into the memory item for fire engine 1. So I'll say fire engine 1, recall items, thrust lever number 1, confirm, and then the pilot monitoring will look at it and confirm it, and he'll say confirm. And then I will say idle as I'm bringing it back to idle. And then I'll say continue, and that's his cue that he should continue with the memory items. So he's going to put his hand on the fuel control switch, and he's going to say fuel control switch number 1, verify. And then I, as the pilot flying, will look at it and say verified. And then he will bring the fuel control switch to cutoff and say cutoff. Then he'll put his hand up on the fire switch and say fire switch number 1, confirm. I'll look up there and confirm and say confirmed. And he'll say pull. And then he'll pull the fire switch. And he'll wait for maybe a second or so just to see if the fire light goes out on the ICAS. If it doesn't go out after a second or two, he's going to rotate and hold to the stop for 1 second and then start the time. And he's going to start the time for 30 seconds. And then after 30 seconds, if the fire light on the ICAS, the message is still illuminated, he's going to then fire the other bottle. Remember, there's 2 fire bottles per side. So if you have a fire in engine number 1 and it takes 2 bottles to discharge that, you're out of bottles on that side. Even if now you've got a fire engine 2, you wouldn't have any more bottles. There's only 2 per side and not 2 per engine. They did that for weight savings. Used to be these 4-engine airplanes had 2 bottles on for each engine, but not anymore. It's 2 bottles per side. Once we complete the memory items, then we go through the checklist. So fire engine 1, 2, 3, 4, or engine severe damage or separation. One or more of these occurs: engine fire warning, airframe vibrations with abnormal engine indications, or engine separation. Here's the memory items. Thrust lever number 1, confirm idle. We did that. Fuel control switch number 1, confirm cutoff. We did that. Engine fire switch number 1, confirm pull. I pulled it. Light remained illuminated. If the fire engine message is shown, engine fire switch number 1, rotate to stop and hold for 1 second. And then I took my time. After 30 seconds, if the fire engine message stays shown, then rotate to the other stop and hold for 1 second. And that's all you can do. You've fired both bottles. You can also check the ICAS that the bottles have been discharged. So you can see here's the actions. The pilot flying will bring back the thrust lever. That's the Boeing procedure. Some airlines, the pilot monitoring does everything. He'll bring the thrust lever to idle. He'll bring the fuel control switch to cut off, and he'll pull the fire switch. And the pilot flying will monitor and confirm everything. But Boeing's philosophy is, and I think it's a good one, that the captain, or the pilot flying, let's say, the pilot flying wants to bring the thrust lever back so he can verify what he needs to do in terms of rudder to keep the airplane coordinated once he's bringing that power back. So, because he's the one controlling the airplane. So as he brings the thrust lever back, his foot's going to be on the rudder pedal, adding rudder. And, it's kind of a pilot flying function to feel the airplane in flight when you're flying it. And so bringing the thrust lever to idle and the airplane yawing, we'd rather have the pilot flying feeling that than the pilot monitoring doing that. So the pilot flying generally will bring back the thrust lever, but the pilot monitoring will bring the fuel control switch and the fire switch, are his duties, or her duties. You'll reach up to the top there, and you'll remember when the fuel control switch goes to cutoff, that unlocks the fire switch. But also, if you have a fire, that's going to unlock the fire switch. So the fact that you have a fire, the switch unlocks itself automatically. We'll pull it straight out, wait for a second or two, see if the fire light extinguishes, look at the ICAS message. If it doesn't extinguish within a couple seconds, then go ahead and rotate it to the stop and hold for 1 second. Now it's important to hold it to the stop. You could theoretically, well, not theoretically, I've seen it done several times, you could rotate the handle and not fire the bottle. And I've seen that happen where guys just kind of rotate it, but they don't go all the way to the stop. And then they don't verify the ICAS message. And, there could be, they thought they fired the bottle, but they didn't. And so it's important to go all the way to the stop, because it's that last little oomph that actually fires the bottle. There's a little pressure that when it goes all the way, it actually fires the squib. And of course, when the bottle discharges, you'll get a discrete light on the overhead, but you're also going to get an ICAS message as well. So, and that's the main thing we look at, is the ICAS message. That discrete light is there only if the ICAS is not working. So we really don't pay too much attention to the discrete light because we're looking at the ICAS alert screen. But that's going to show that the bottle's been discharged. And then notice it says choose one. High airframe vibration occurs and continues after the engine is shut down. Or high airframe vibration does not occur or does not continue after the engine is shut down. So depending on what the case is, if there's no high airframe vibration and the engine's shut down, it's pretty stable, then you can just go to step 8 and bring the transponder mode selector TA. If you do have high vibration after the engine shut down, then without delay you can reduce the airspeed, descend to a safe altitude, which results in an acceptable vibration level. And if high vibration returns and further airspeed reduction and descent are not practical, then increase the airspeed may reduce the vibration. So you have a couple of things that you can do there if the vibration were to occur after the engine is shut down. In training, that usually doesn't happen, so it's usually the second situation. High airframe vibration does not occur or does not continue after the engine is shut down. Now we go to step 8, transponder mode selector TA only. And then choose one. Fire engine message stays shown. Then you go to land at the nearest suitable airport. Severe engine damage or separation has occurred. Plan to land at the nearest suitable airport. Or if the fire engine message is blank with no indications of severe engine damage or separation, then go to step 10. Do not accomplish the following checklist: engine shutdown, overheat, engine to cell. So notice if the situation is stable and the fire engine message blanks and there's no indication of severe damage or separation, then it's just like an engine shutdown. So you have 3 other engines, so it's not a situation where you have to land at the nearest suitable airport. But you may want to do that anyway. It depends on what your company wants you to do. There may be a company airport or an airport with good facilities where you can divert to, but it's not necessary to land at the nearest suitable airport unless you have severe engine damage or separation, or you have a fire engine message that stays illuminated. Then you want to land at the nearest suitable airport. Fire APU checklist. This is something we did the other day with the passenger evacuation. It's not a memory item. It's just to get out the checklist and do it. Again, you get the fire bell, you get the master warning light. You're going to silence the warning, silence the bell, and then identify the emergency or the fire. In this case, fire APU checklist. And then we would do the fire APU checklist. Condition fire is detected in the APU. APU fire switch confirm, pull and rotate to the stop and hold for 1 second. So that's another confirmation item. So I'll read it, the whole thing first. APU fire switch confirm, pull, rotate to the stop and hold for 1 second. Then I'll go up to the APU fire switch and say APU fire switch confirm. And he's going to look at it and say confirmed, and I'll say pull, and I'll do it. I'll pull it, and then I'll rotate to the stop and hold for 1 second. Then choose one. If the message stays shown, plan to land near a suitable airport. If the APU message blanks, then do not accomplish the following checklist: APU. And chances are, if this happens, you're probably on the ground. But if you weren't on the ground, we generally don't use the APU in the air unless you're doing an APU takeoff for bleed air purposes. But normally this message is one that you're more likely to get on the ground. And again, we're going to reach up and pull the APU fire switch. And again, if you have an APU fire, the lock will unlock automatically with a fire, so you don't have to override and pull because you'll have a fire indication. And so there's the master warning, the fire APU message. And also, if you're on the ground, the APU will shut down automatically. And if you're on the ground, it will also fire the bottle automatically. So even though you're doing these actions, chances are, if you're on the ground, this has been done automatically already. But you're still going to shut down the APU by pulling the fire switch, and you're going to fire the bottle, even though it may be done automatically on the ground for you. And that completes the end of the bonus briefing for the fire fuselage non-normals. Next, we'll go in flight and do a couple of these non-normals in flight.